Hello and welcome to the latest installment of the Health Storytelling Author Q&A series for this academic year, fall 2024 and spring 2025. I'm Maryn McKenna. I'm a journalist and author and senior fellow in the Center for the Study of Human Health at Emory University. I'm the curator of this series, which makes me your host as we undertake our latest set of author conversations. In a moment, I'll introduce you to my guest, journalist Lynne Peeples, and her amazing new book, The Inner Clock: Living in Sync with Our Circadian Rhythms. But first, let me tell you about this series. At least once per month during an academic year, we invite writers whose journalistic or academic books examine health, the science and history of health, and health's intersection with society. This series of conversations is sponsored by the Emory Center for the Study of Human Health, along with an array of fantastic co-sponsors. This autumn, those co-sponsors are the Georgia Center for the Book, a local affiliate of the Library of Congress that stages very frequent public conversations with authors, illustrators, poets, and others to bring news of new books to the public. Also, Science Gallery Atlanta, which presents exhibits that ignite creativity and discovery, where science and art collide. Their newest exhibit, Resilient Earth, has just opened. And plus, this year, we have new co-sponsors for this series, Emory's new Center for Public Scholarship and Engagement, which creates opportunities for faculty, staff, and students to share ideas with local and global audiences, and also the center's inaugural Ideas Festival Emory, which took place in September on Emory's Oxford campus and will return next year. So here's who's appearing in this series this fall. This series is live streamed on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and archived on YouTube. Tonight, Lynne Peeples and her brand new book, The Inner Clock: Living in Sync with Our Circadian Rhythms, published by Riverhead Books of Penguin Random House. And on the 13th of November, Lena Zeldovich, who'll talk about the history of bacteriophage in her fascinating book, The Living Medicine: How a Life-Saving Cure Was Nearly Lost and Why It Will Rescue Us When Antibiotics Fail, which comes out from St. Martin's Press this month. And earlier this autumn, we heard from Emory Associate Professor Rachel Hall Clifford with Underbelly: Childhood Diarrhea and the Hidden Local Realities of Global Health, which was published by the MIT Press in May. One final note: this is a live event. You can interact with us, and we encourage you to do that. If you want to ask a question, please comment on any of the platforms where you're watching us, and our producer, Stefan Kaplan of Spin It Social, will make sure we see what you've said. Do note that I'll turn to your questions in the second half of this 60-minute live stream, but you can put your questions in at any time, and I hope you do. Now, let's turn to our book and guest. Lynne Peeples is a Seattle-based journalist and author whose work appears in The Guardian, Scientific American, Nature, The Atlantic, and many other publications. She has 2 master's degrees in biostatistics from Harvard and in science journalism from NYU, and in an earlier career was a biostatistician for HIV clinical trials and environmental health studies. The Inner Clock is her first book. Lynne, I'm so happy that you're here. It's really a thrill to talk to you after so long. Welcome to the Health Storytelling series.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, and you did such an amazing job of promoting it for us as well, so thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think we can start right away with just sort of like who you are. I'm fascinated by those 2 master's degrees and that you actually had a career, I guess, in public health before you turned to being a journalist, which is the identity that I know you from or through or about. So let's start with that. Who are you and how did you come to do this work?
Yeah, so I guess I started in numbers. I was a math major. and then pursued graduate studies in biostatistics, as you noted. And yeah, I got to apply that to important public health threats, HIV, various environmental health issues, which I was passionate about. But words just kind of kept coming up. I had the most fun when I was working on journal articles related to those numbers. So eventually I decided to, make a career shift. And I hadn't even thought that you could be a science writer. But sure enough, it's a career opportunity. And I took that path, went to NYU, and from there, I've been writing stuck with environmental health. So public health, the environment, where those intersect is where I'm most passionate.
And I think I first became aware of your work, and this is going back quite a while now, when you were writing about foodborne illness in the Pacific Northwest. Do I remember that correctly?
I did do some foodborne illness. I did a series when I was working at HuffPost on called The Infection Loop. So kind of emerging infectious diseases, in which I touched on foodborne illness as well as zoonotic disease. Possibly that. I'm not sure.
The HuffPost that I remember. So what drew you to doing this book, to looking at circadian rhythms?
Yeah, I think this goes way back subconsciously. So I grew up in Seattle. Right now it's sunny, but for the next few months it's likely not. And that's, we have a reputation for gloom, which is pretty real. So we're really high latitude. Our days get really short in the winter. It's dark a lot. So I just remember growing up and feeling kind of those effects beneath the surface, that sort of the seasonal affective disorder was at play. And then my high school, like a lot of high schools, started really early. So there would be weeks and weeks in which I'd go to school in the dark, and then I'd come out of the gym after basketball practice and it would be dark again. So I saw very little daylight, and I never really felt great. I feel like, the weight of that was on me, and I never felt quite awake in class like a lot of students complain about. But then I went away to college to Minnesota, which people thought was a little odd, but I remember those winter days just being so bright. It was cold, but the snow would reflect the sun, all this light. I remember my spirit just being lifted. I remember just feeling better, and even calculus clicked, which didn't in high school. Who knows why? But all these things, were again happening behind the scenes. But it wasn't until I moved back to Seattle after a stint on the East Coast as a freelancer. I was invited to Safeco Field, which was the former name of our major league ballpark here where the Seattle Mariners play. And they had just installed LED lights that they were showing off to journalists. And so they had them in the stadium, which was, cool and all. They had some fancy lights with flickering and colorful. But then they took us into the locker room and showed us that they had just installed this new system of lights that they could adjust the intensity of and the color of. And they explained that this was to support the players' circadian rhythms, to energize them before games, and then to turn them to a warmer hue and dimmer after the games to chill them out and help them sleep so they could get up and play the next day. And I remember thinking, what is this about? And could the circadian thing explain some of my, lifelong troubles, or this kind of theme that had been across my life? And maybe this was a tool I could use. So that started me down the rabbit hole that ultimately led here.
So we need to talk right away about the rabbit hole, because I am looking at a 2-page spread in a newspaper, and judging by some of the language, I think it might be a British newspaper, and its title, next to a beautiful picture of you, says, "This science writer spent 10 days in a nuclear bunker with no clocks or daylight. What it did to her body should make us all change the way we live." And now that episode is really close to the beginning of the book. And so I feel like, especially having looked at this headline image, we have to start there. You did what?
Fair enough. So yes, I made the Daily Mail tabloid.
Wow.
Anyway, yes. So I thought, as part of, it was, there was a little bit of a push from my publisher to get myself in the book.
Mm.
And I thought it would be a great opportunity to really get a feel myself. I mean, I wasn't the first person to do anything like this by far. Other scientists decades back had cut themselves off from circadian cues to see what would happen to the clocks inside them. Right. So we've got, these trillions of clocks throughout our body that coordinate. We'll talk about that. So I decided to cut myself off from daylight, from clocks, any other cues that could possibly tell me the time of day. And I found on Airbnb an old command control center for a nuclear missile complex from the Cold War era that a guy had purchased from the government, cleaned out, souped up into this luxurious Airbnb, and it checked all the boxes. So I booked it for 10 nights. He thought that was a little odd, but he helped me with my experiment. We had to do all kinds of things like put tape over all the digital clocks that are so ubiquitous. I had no idea until I started paying attention to that. And then we set all the lights to a dim red, which that's the color that is least likely to affect your circadian rhythms. I had learned that. And I tried to go about my life for 10 days under there, decked out with a bunch of devices measuring my heart rate, my temperature, my blood glucose, light, sleep, and collected a lot of data and juggled and played the harmonica.
So all sleeping and waking, you were under the same light level, which was low. It's like you weren't totally in the dark.
Correct. Uh-huh. It's very dim, but like bright enough that I could see.
And describe like what that felt like. Did you sense that you were becoming detached from what would be your normal rhythm, or did you think that everything was normal?
So I'd say for the first couple days, I felt pretty normal. I mean, it was weird, sure. But actually like going back and looking at the data, that first day, I lived pretty close to a 24-hour day. Like, I mean, these clocks are pretty good that we have inside of us, but they do drift. And it wasn't until like day 5, day 6 that I was off. I could feel it. My gut was, bothering me. I just felt kind of like empty-headed. There was a day I just like kept dropping everything. I had no coordination. My mood was fluctuating. I felt like a little more depressed. And yeah, it felt like jet lag.
Did you know? Wait, eventually, obviously, you come out of the bunker and you get to read what all the devices that you're carrying are had recorded. I'm assuming you didn't know at the time.
Correct.
When you discovered that you hadn't kept to time the way you would expect to, how did that feel?
I mean, yeah, definitely. Like it's interesting that intuition you have. I mean, I really could feel like these clocks getting out of sync. I mean, my body was just, from like day 5, 6 on, things were off. And it was really, I don't know. I mean, cool is not the right word, but it was neat to see how the numbers really aligned with how I felt in my body. It was, I mean, I had scientists that were helping me with this, and we were tracking, like the heart rate, the temperature, and the glucose, and like how they, were staying in pretty close rhythm until about then. And then they were just kind of all off on their own. It was just like evidence right there that this coordination that the body counts on to do the right things at the right times just went out the door. And there was a night, it was the night that I had pancakes for dinner, which I'll leave it to who to read the book to determine what time I actually ate those pancakes. But it was that night that I got up to pee 4 times. I mean, and that right there is like evidence that my circadian rhythms were off, because our body's programmed to not do that if aligned.
Once you emerged, how long did it take you to get back to normal?
It's about 5 days. I mean, it was close to a week. It took a few days. Because I kind of kept tracking things. But I eventually snapped out of it. I mean, it's similar again to kind of jet lag. It takes about a day per time zone to get back in sync. And I was at one point completely flipped. I was doing my days when people above ground were sleeping. Wow. But at the end I was close to 10 hours off, like 9-10 hours off. So I guess I got back a little quicker than 9 days.
So I think at this point, we need to talk about the biology, about the internal clocks that you've referenced throughout our bodies that help us to live in time. So tell us some about that.
Right. So as I have hinted at, our whole body is filled with these timekeepers. It's pretty much every cell in your body. So there's trillions of them. And we evolved with those clocks ticking in coordination so that each of our body systems are primed to do the right things at the right time. And there's kind of one key clock in the brain, master clock, that is sort of orchestrating the conductor of this symphony of clocks throughout the body. And emerging science is calling into question that, I mean, it's not the only ruler, that some of these other clocks can do things on their own. But we have this whole symphony. But these clocks, I mean, that term circadian, circa means about or around. And that means that's telling us that these clocks do not tick at precisely 24 hours a day. They're either a little faster or a little slower than that. And this is why it is so critical for them to get cues from the environment, from that 24-hour Earth day, to keep in sync with that Earth day and then with each other. So, and this is kind of the whole impetus for this book is, I mean, in my own life, and I think pretty universally in various ways, modern life is throwing all these wrenches in that clockwork because we're spending our days indoors. We're not getting that contrast in our days with the daylight, bright light during the day and the darkness at night. And we're eating at all hours. We're eating late at night, which we did not evolve to do in our system. Our clocks are not designed to accommodate. And, and then not that many of us go into bunkers for 10 days, but we do cross a lot of time zones and, do crazy things like flip our clocks back and forth with daylight saving time. So all these things that we're doing to cut ourselves off from those natural cues that our clocks need to do all these things at the right times.
We're staring into screens as you and I are doing right now.
Yes, that too.
and too many of us are, saying, oh no, I'm going to go to bed. And then we lie in bed, doom scrolling with the screens glowing in our faces. I'm sure everyone who is watching this has been guilty of this. So let's talk first about I do want to remind everybody, I can see some comments coming in already. That's fantastic. Thank you. We welcome your comments at any time. I will ask them of Lynne once we get a little further in this conversation, but we'd love to see them because that means we know you're listening and picking up on some of the stuff that we're talking about. So please feel free to put them into the comment boxes wherever you are at any time. So let's talk first about all the disruptions that you just referenced. How is it? What's the significance of our interfering in them? What are the things that go wrong in our own bodies or in society?
Yeah, so when our clocks get out of sync, and this goes back to that idea that, these clocks we evolved with to prime our system. So like our digestion, to do that at the right time. And when we throw food, for example, at it, when it's not ready, then it's not able to handle that food, metabolize that food in an effective manner. And this is why some emerging science is linking like late night eating, shift work, this other circadian disruption with a greater risk of metabolic disease, for example. So again, these systems, so it's priming us, to digest food. It's priming us to defend ourselves against like invading pathogens. So our immune system is very circadian. So if we mess up those rhythms, we might more likely get sick, for example. There were several studies linking circadian rhythms with various aspects of COVID, for example, like when to get a vaccine, when to get tested for more accuracy, those kinds of things. So just all these systems in our body rely on clocks. So because we can't be doing everything at all hours, right? There's a reason our melatonin levels rise at night and we sleep, helping us fall asleep at night. And we can't have our metabolism high and our defenses up and all these things at 24 hours. We only have so much energy. So it's allotted. Yeah.
So I remember you say in the book that there's, in addition to the individual injuries that we may be doing to ourselves by interfering in these rhythms, that there are social costs as well. I think you referenced that there are many really well-known accidents that have been profoundly traumatic, that have killed or injured a lot of people, that can be traced back to a disruption in the circadian rhythm of the person who caused the accident.
Right. Or and this is where it's like sleep deprivation and circadian disruption. These things go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. They're, a couple different systems, but circadian rhythms are very much a part of this. And so, we find, like Exxon Valdez, some other nuclear disasters, these things often happen in the middle of the night or with, shift workers. In fact, I watched a video while I was in the bunker of another nuclear complex in Arkansas that had a disaster, I think it was early 80s, in which there was an explosion based on a worker's mistake. A worker had gone in there and it almost turned into like a nuclear disaster. Thankfully, it wasn't anything quite as terrible. But that happened in the middle of the night. This team was working, I think of, all day shift. So the implications for shift work, implications for, you personally thinking about maybe when to have surgery. I talk about in my later chapter on circadian medicine. During the course of writing this book, I had surgery myself. And so I was thinking about these things and when is an optimal time to, for a surgeon to be at their best, for example. These things are all linked to circadian rhythms. And it affects more than that individual. It's who else is on the road with them or in the air in an airplane with them or, accounting for them to ensure safety, right?
So you said that just now that so many major disasters have that part of the setup for those is sleep deprivation. And I think it's fair to say that everyone in our society is obsessed with sleep. We are concerned that we don't get enough. We think we get up at the wrong times, or we go to sleep at the wrong times, or we make too much of a delta between how much we let ourselves sleep during the week or on the weekend or whenever our work weeks are. And people think so much about, sort of hacking their sleep and improving their sleep. So I'm just wondering how your understanding of sleep and the role that it plays in our lives and our alertness, how that changed over the course of researching the book.
Yeah, I think it reinforced that it is critical, but it added some important nuances. Actually, a whole lot of them, but I'll note a couple right here that are popping into my head. This idea of the quantity of hours of sleep is not the only important variable. The quality of our sleep is also tied to when we sleep. So you could sleep 8 hours at a certain window of hours at night, but you might be more well rested and your body might be better off if you actually slept 7 hours at a different window of time. So based on your own personal circadian rhythms, there's an optimal window for you to sleep. So this is not something I would have ever thought about. And then also, I think you've sort of hinted at that delta. The consistency of your sleep time 7 days a week is critical. If we keep whiplashing our bodies, getting up early during the weekday for school or work, sleeping in on the weekends to catch up on sleep, naturally makes sense. And, then we get up early again on Monday. And that what is termed social jet lag that I talk about in the book. That is also, it's really unhealthy for us. It's like traveling across, a few time zones on Friday and coming back again Monday. You're just throwing your systems out of whack.
So somebody who's watching asks, is there are there myths related to sleep? And what was the biggest myth related to sleep that you came across as you were researching the book?
Myth related to sleep. Question. I don't know that this is a myth, might not be the right word, but the first thing that comes to mind is the use of melatonin, which is hugely popular. It's rising in use even among kids, which some doctors are pretty concerned about. But I'm guessing a lot of people, like myself at least, up until learning this, if I was to take melatonin, which I sometimes did, especially if I had a bout of insomnia for a few days, I would take it before bed. And I would take, they're usually dosed out 3 to 5 milligrams. But as I learned from scientists, the optimal way to take melatonin, if you must, is actually the time in which your melatonin levels are naturally rising, which is like 2-3 hours before bed.
Oh.
And you don't want to take much, like half a milligram will do, maybe a milligram. So less is more, and earlier. Because if you take it right at bedtime, there's studies that show that can actually make things worse for you and kind of delay the time at which your melatonin rises, like the next night. So it might perpetuate your insomnia.
That's really fascinating because, of course, you hear of people, and certainly I know there are people in my own life who, if they're suffering from insomnia, if they're having a bout of insomnia and they're awake in the middle of the night, they get up and take the melatonin then, thinking that it's going to knock them out as like a healthier version of a sleeping pill. And what I hear you say is that is the wrong way to take it.
That is what I've been learning. Yes.
So I'm going to make this all about me for a minute. I am supremely sensitive to light. I cannot sleep if there's a light shining anywhere. I used to, when I traveled a lot for my journalism, I used to carry a big roll of black duct tape so that I could tape over, like the peepholes in doors and LED clocks, clocks on the hotel microwave and things like that. Eventually, I just resorted to making sure I always had a sleep mask with me. But that sense of, to make this now not about me, that I was really struck when I was reading the book with how important light exposure is and how harmful it can be. And you both in how we are sort of disrupting the night with artificial light, and also in the way that you went in search of a lack of light. You went to a dark sky area. And so just talk to us a bit about how we're changing day and night and those times when sleep is supposed to be happening.
Right. Yeah. I am just like you, by the way, very sensitive. And I feel like I'm getting more sensitive as I get older, which I think is somewhat common. So yeah, we're individually, we're all different as far as our sensitivity goes to light. But our environment now, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I mean, most of us during the day, we're living in this like basically a twilight zone. It's like dim during the day and it's like bright at night. So we're just not getting that contrast. And so it's a combination of the intensity of the light and the wavelengths that are at play here. And actually taking a step back from that, we have our visual system is separate. It informs to some extent, but it's separate from our circadian system. So lights can look bright to us consciously based on our visual system, but they could still not be communicating to our circadian system. It takes a lot more light and a slightly different range of wavelengths to tell the circadian system that it's daytime compared to our visual system. So that's why you can be indoors. It can seem bright, but it's nothing compared to what you get outside. Even on like a gloomy Seattle day, it's like 99% of the time way more informative to your clocks to be outside or really close to a window than under our artificial lights.
So there's actually something in that in the piece on you in the Daily Mail that I read out earlier about windows, about how we think that windows let light into our houses, that we are exposing ourselves to light, and that's a positive. But you talk in the book about how modern glass which seems to be letting light into our houses, may actually also be interfering with our circadian rhythms because of what it blocks.
Yes. That is not to say, I mean, windows are great. Like, even if I'm going to get to the details here, but I'm a fan. But yeah, modern energy efficiency windows add a coating that blocks a lot of those blue wavelengths, which are the most critical for circadian clocks. They block a lot of those because it makes sense for energy efficiency and in thinking about climate change. It's great, but but it's not doing our clocks and our health any favors. So it's blocking a portion, not all. It just means essentially that we need more. That means like we need to up our dosage. So be in front of that window longer, get outside more, do everything you can to get the photons necessary to tell the clocks it's daytime. But yeah, it's both between our artificial lights that don't have the right wavelengths and are too dim, and then the windows are blocking it. And then, and for a lot of people, like, they don't have access to a window. I'm very fortunate. And, there's people who have corner offices that are very fortunate, but so many people are spending their daytime, their working hours, well far away from any access to daylight.
So when we started talking, you described that experience you had of going into the stadium in Seattle and encountering this new lighting system that they'd installed for the benefit of the players. And I'd like to kind of go back to that and start talking about the ways that we can change the kind of disruption to our circadian rhythms, to our sensors of light and darkness that you've been talking about. You make a lot of observations in the book about what you've personally committed to. But before we get to your personal regimen, I'd like to talk a bit about sort of what the big efforts are to change the way that we've messed about with our personal cycles.
Yeah. So, you talked about the lighting in the locker room. There is a growing push or just a lot more companies now are producing these circadian lighting systems that you can tune, as I mentioned with the locker room, the color, the wavelength, and the intensity of that light. You can even program it to change over the course of the day to mimic what it's doing outside. So I visited a neonatal intensive care unit in Cincinnati that had just installed this system in hopes of helping babies, be healthier, develop faster, get out of the hospital sooner. And they're looking at the data now on that. And the technology is getting better and better. We have the LEDs now. We know how to do this. People are taking data from the skies all around the world, trying to see, okay, what does the sky actually look like? And how can we bring that indoors? So it's fascinating, but it's also, because it's not regulated, it's not standardized. There's a lot of products out there, touting these benefits that, I don't know that they can back up. So it's sort of a Wild West in that arena right now.
This is making me think that there must be like TikTok coaches on how to optimize your circadian rhythms by buying a particular kind of light bulb that just happens to be in TikTok shop.
Very likely. I can see that too.
So yeah. A point that you make in the book, and I think it's really important to verbalize, because you were just describing consumer products, is that light and darkness and sleep and well-regulated circadian rhythms really can be viewed through an equity lens, that they are an equity issue. And you talk really poignantly about how being of lower socioeconomic status or living in neighborhoods that are of lower socioeconomic status deprives people of, among other things, of appropriate darkness, that policing can be linked with an overexposure to light. Talk about that.
Yeah, I do think this is kind of an overlooked environmental justice issue that we should be talking about more. We talked about food deserts. There's also daylight deserts and darkness deserts. So, and it's usually the same populations, right? So during the day, I mentioned, the corner offices, these are not the people that often have the corner offices or they access to windows. They're working in back of house spaces, like, maybe laundry rooms, or they're in a warehouse or a call center. So they're lacking the daylight. And without adequate daylight, you're also more susceptible to the effects of light at night. So all these things kind of snowball. So they're also more likely to do shift work, right? So they have all these challenges. Yeah, and then at night, as you were talking about, they're often, in urban areas, maybe, they're like the street lights are coming in. They're not going to be at the top floor of a building, right? They're going to probably be basement, first floor. Bedroom might be facing the street with car headlights and street lights. And I toured some public housing complexes in which police had erected big floodlights. And, the idea is to increase safety. But I saw so many windows without any shades. Maybe they hung a flag. There was certainly no blackout blinds. And they're just lights just shining right into these people's homes. So I think, they're getting it from all ends, and it does create an equity issue.
So I think it might be time to talk about how we change all this. And you have a lengthy discussion in the book as part of, as you said at the start, putting yourself in the narrative. Not only did you do all these experimental things to understand how your circadian rhythms can be disrupted, but you also, in the last portion of the book, undertake a kind of reform program for optimizing your life, for I guess, healing your circadian rhythms. And I would really like to hear about that. And I am quite sure that people who are watching want to hear about that too. So where did you start?
So light and dark, they're the primary driver of our circadian rhythms. So that was a key focus for me. So again, I am super fortunate. I mean, you can see my window here, but I was shocked that even where I was sitting in front of a window at my desk, I had a light sensor that a scientist lent me. I was not getting adequate circadian light.
Huh.
I mean, I had lights blasting in here, but the window that you see here was not enough in front of my eyes that I was getting enough information because you have photoreceptors in the eyes that communicate to that master clock in the brain. So I did I played with my desk, and I, pulled it away from that back wall so I could have more window in front, and got myself a little closer to the window. And then I tracked my light during the day. I spent more time outside. I would make sure I had my coffee on my little balcony outside, even if it was cold out. It's covered, so I didn't have an excuse. So I played around with those things. I also, I sampled some sun lamps to get some bonus light in those dark winter mornings in Seattle to up my photon dosage to get to the right spot. And then at night, I just started turning off all the lights. And scientists had nudged me in this direction, but I was amazed at how little light we actually need to see. I mean, at least, healthy individuals. It doesn't take much. I set out a suite of electric candles around my apartment that I can just turn on with a remote, and super cozy, plenty of light. And that's kind of how I spend my nights now. So now I have that contrast. Even if I'm like indoors for most of the day, still, at least I have, increased that contrast between day and night.
Do you make sure to get out in outside and get like sunlight, if there's sunlight in Seattle, like early in the morning? Is that the first thing you do?
Great. So good point. Yes. Morning time is the prime time. I mean, we want light all day, but research suggests there's a window, within the first couple of hours of getting up in the morning where it's most important to ensure you get that light. So I'll often walk to the coffee shop, 5-10 minutes away. So you get 15-20 minute dose. Is an excellent way to start the day. Yeah.
But I'm sure that just that controlling your day and night exposures isn't all that you did, right?
I kind of have 3 core clock rules that I talk about in the book. So that first one is creating that contrast. And then another thing I played around with is constricting the hours in which I ate during the day. So science suggests that for our rhythms and for our health, some fascinating studies coming out for benefits to metabolism, potentially longevity, shortening the window you eat during the day. And that is especially critical at the end of the day. And the rhythms of our metabolism, digestion are very different later at night than they are earlier in the day, where our bodies are primed to actually handle the calories at one time and not the other. So stopping eating anything about 3 hours before bed. And that includes like a sip of wine, which, it's hard for me to avoid every night. You got to give yourself a few little cheat days, but cutting off any calories like 3 hours before bed. So trying to constrict. And I found amazing difference in my sleep when I started doing that. Like I started tracking with, I have a Fitbit, but whatever tracker, just over time, I know these things aren't super accurate, but you can see trends. And I definitely saw more restful sleep, more REM when I did abide by that rule.
So I think most people probably think of alcohol as a soporific, like having a sip of something, a glass of wine, a sip of whiskey, whatever your poison is
Right.
something that helps people to sleep. And you're saying no.
It might help you fall asleep, but it is not going to help your quality of sleep. So that's, it's sort of a, quasi misnomer, because I've had the same thought. That was my excuse sometimes, but really it's, it's really messing with your REM, I think is a lot of the data, but it's not, your heart rate's going to be higher through the night. A lot of these measures that we look at, we're trying to find data to correspond with quality of sleep. Those things are definitely reduced.
So I want to ask a little bit more about the implications of what you found, about ways in which whether doing the kind of work that you just described to achieve healthy cycles, to bring our circadian rhythms into better balance and regulation. Is this an anti-capitalist act? Are people not going to be able to do shift work anymore, or all go to the office, or all go to school at the same time of day because they're respecting their personal rhythms, and their rhythms don't necessarily match the dominant cultures?
I think there's a line here somewhere of practical, but I do think there are some like relatively low-hanging practical things we can do to lessen the impacts, reduce the number of people struggling with these things. And I think, as far as shift work goes, we're always going to need, 24-hour healthcare and first responders and so many professions, right? There's no way around that. Certain things, like, do we really need Amazon to deliver whatever the thing you thought you needed when you were, doom scrolling like midnight by 4 a.m.? I don't know. But yeah, so shift work will always be there. There's circadian science now pointing to ways in which shift workers could help mitigate some of the impacts, which I talk about in the book. And then, schools and workplaces. So for schools, delaying start times, at least, a little bit. I think California is now mandated, no middle school or high school can start before 8:30. And that there's becoming some momentum in getting schools to start later. I think the payback is huge there. I mean, it's still too early for these adolescents whose rhythms are drifting later naturally at that time in their lives. But it could have, multiple benefits there. Workplaces, flexible hours for those that can manage that. I think that could help a lot of people. I talked to employers, mostly in Europe, who had tried this new kind of time system for their offices and found greater productivity, which makes sense. You let a worker work when they're most productive by their circadian rhythms. You're not only letting them sleep more, but also giving them the hours at which they're naturally most productive, because we do ebb and flow throughout the day personally with that. Get them, getting their work done then, they're going to produce more for you. So I think it could be a win-win for employer and employee there too.
So it sounds like you think that there is some hope, maybe if not in the United States, then maybe elsewhere, to enact some broad reform that would improve our relationship to our circadian rhythms and thereby harvest the health benefits that come with that.
I believe so. I think there are definitely steps we can take. And I think the daylight saving time debate too, that's one that there's, lots and lots of talk about either going permanent daylight saving time or permanent standard time. And I think, still like there's a lot of people that lean daylight saving time. That's kind of popular. But as the scientists are trying to make clear, standard time is far healthier for our rhythms. And staying on daylight saving time through the winter could be really detrimental to us. So that's another.
So I happen to live in one of the states where this is a constant active discussion in the legislature of whether the state I live, I'm sitting in Atlanta, the state of Georgia periodically talks about, should we move permanently to daylight savings time, or should we, and then of course the counter is no, we should never go on daylight savings time at all. So let's talk a little bit about that, because it's always been interesting to me that a difference of just 1 hour twice a year, of course, has such a profound effect that people sleep late and they feel terrible, and more people get into car accidents. Just losing that 1 hour seems to have a really broad effect. So what's the argument?
Yeah, I mean, there's the acute effect of just like whiplashing the body, similar to what we've talked about. And then there's like chronic effect. If we're on daylight saving time, essentially we're taking an hour of that morning light that we know is so critical for our clocks, putting it at the end of the day, which is when we're supposed to have darkness. So yeah, it's unnatural. It's gonna throw the clocks off a little bit. And there's been some kind of natural experiments done where they looked at people on the eastern and western ends of a time zone and saw that health measures like longevity, cancer risk, accidents, these things were the longevity was higher on the east side. The west side had the higher rates of things you don't want, essentially.
Because they were getting more light at the end of the day because of where they were geographically.
Right. So the sun's rising earlier clock time on the wall on the east than the west.
So the healthy option would be wherever you are, in whatever time zone you're in, the healthier option is standard time because it's rotated toward the morning.
Exactly.
Okay.
Bingo.
Okay, you just mentioned I think this is going to be my last question. You just referenced longevity and cancer, I think, and that is the last question I want to ask. If we can, in the ways that you advocate or the ways you personally sampled, if we can reframe our relationships to our circadian rhythms and get ourselves back more into sync with natural cycles, you suggest toward the end of the book that there could be long-term population health benefits, which would of course be individual health benefits as well, that it may affect longevity, it may affect occurrence of cancer, it may have some relevance for the occurrence of Alzheimer's disease. And this to me sounds like a really important argument for taking seriously the disruption to circadian rhythms. So let's finish up by talking about the promise of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is just emerging science, a lot more to be done, but the data it's compelling. I mean, I talked to many scientists who are seeing, I mean, it's sort of a chicken or egg question, but to the Alzheimer's point, the correlation between circadian rhythm, like robustness, and Alzheimer's is very clear. And there's hints of like the mechanistic explanation for this being that, kind of a dampened circadian rhythm is making people more prone to cognitive decline, as well as Alzheimer's effects on the brain could be affecting circadian rhythms. But they think both are probably happening, kind of creating a bit of a snowball effect. But that's also pointing to, again, possible ways to mitigate this by kind of infusing more rhythm into people's lives. They're talking about in nursing homes, brighter lights during the day, darker lights at night, and people are having better sleep and are less agitated, and all kinds of, beneficial outcomes from that. So yeah, cognitive decline, and there's studies linking circadian rhythm robustness, and that's really just like a stronger rhythm during the day. So you think about your grandpa on the chair, kind of falling in and out of sleep throughout the afternoon, kind of evidence of a less robust circadian rhythm. The more robust we get that, and the more rhythm to our days, they're finding that is linked to all kinds of chronic diseases and potentially longevity.
That's just fascinating. Do you think there's any is there any hope for any kind of sort of a reform movement here? Are there things that broad social actions that can be taken, or is it all up to individuals?
I think it's both. I mean, I think individuals, there's steps you can take yourself to, I guess, mitigate some of the issues that social society is throwing at us, but just to create more rhythm in your days. But yeah, I mean, there's many fronts to what we can do as a society. You know, the light at night issue. You know, there's a lot of grassroots groups working on that one. Just trying, like, I mean, that saves energy too. If we can just get the lights out at night, it's good for the climate. It's good for us. And thinking about the justice implications here, thinking about, you know, how we design cities, architectural design, housing, you know, the daylight saving time, the workplaces, the schools. I mean, there's a lot of things that as a society, I mean, yeah, some of it will require government input and creating some standards and pushing things forward. But I think just awareness, people talking about it, you know, professions that are doing work that's relevant to it, you know, keeping this in mind if they're design buildings, for example, those things could all have a beneficial impact.
It's just fascinating. It's such a good book. I learned so much, and thank you so much for this just great conversation about all the nuances. I feel that there's so much for people to learn, and I'm really glad that you came to talk to us about it. So thanks.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been great. Thank you.
So that's it for this edition of the Health Storytelling Author Q&A series. Please consider following Lynne on social media. She is Lynne Peeples on Twitter or X and on Blue Sky. And she's lynne.peeples on Threads and Instagram. You can find her on all of them. And buy her book, which is available at Penguin Random House, her publisher, and at Amazon, of course. Though please don't order it to be delivered at 4 o'clock in the morning. That would not be nice to the delivery person's sleep cycles. But you can also find the book at bookshop.org, which is effectively the anti-Amazon. It's a platform that funnels orders to independent bookstores. Please join us next month on the 13th of November when Lena Zeldovich will discuss the work she performed in Russian and Georgian archives to write The Living Medicine, how a life-saving cure was nearly lost and why it will rescue us when antibiotics fail. Again, just as with Lynne's, a brand new book that the audience of this series will be hearing about just as it comes out. Until next time, I'm Maryn McKenna. On behalf of the Center for the Study of Human Health at Emory University and the Georgia Center for the Book and Science Gallery Atlanta and Emory's Center for Public Scholarship and Engagement and its Ideas Festival Emory, and for me, thank you for watching. See you next month.